Amid the gleaming marble floors and towering glass walls, an unnoticed figure quietly observed, holding a secret that could shatter the empire around her. The sun glinted off the glass facade of Meridian Towers, a sleek, imposing skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. Inside the grand lobby, marble floors gleamed under the warm glow of recessed lights, and polished chrome accents reflected the bustling energy of corporate ambition. Ivy Monroe stepped quietly through the revolving doors, a mop in one hand and a cleaning cart in the other. She moved with practiced ease, her dark green uniform blending her into the background, a shadow beneath the tower. To the executives striding past in tailored suits, she was invisible, just another cog in the machine that kept the empire running smoothly. Her curly hair was tucked neatly under a cap, and her name tag hung crookedly on her uniform, as if she had hurriedly clipped it on without much thought. But Ivy's sharp eyes missed nothing. As she pushed her cart across the polished floors, her mind was busy cataloging every detail. The hurried whispers, the nervous glances, the subtle power plays in the room. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity, she reminded herself silently. It was a lesson she had lived by ever since her childhood in the cramped apartments of Eastwood Heights, where opportunity seemed as elusive as a shadow. Ivy had learned to see past appearances long ago. The marble floors and designer interiors of Meridian Towers were a facade, a shell built on the labor of people like her. And while the leadership team upstairs might have thought they held all the cards, Ivy knew better. She had spent years preparing for this moment, quietly and strategically acquiring shares in the company under different aliases. Today, she wasn't just a janitor, she was the silent architect of a revolution. As she wiped down the glass panels near the reception desk, snippets of conversation floated her way. "Did you see the quarterly numbers? Carter's pulling in another bonus this year," a young assistant whispered, her tone a mixture of envy and resignation. "Meanwhile, the rest of us are stuck with overtime. And no raises," her companion replied bitterly. Ivy's lips curled into a faint smile. The frustration in their voices was familiar. It was the same discontent she had once felt during her own days as a junior analyst in a system that rewarded arrogance and trampled over kindness. The seeds of change were already there. She only needed to nurture them. As Ivy rolled her cart toward the service elevator, she passed a group of executives gathered near the coffee bar. Their conversation was loud, laced with laughter and condescension. "Imagine being stuck on cleaning duty all day," one man chuckled, his gold watch catching the light. "I'd lose my mind." Another woman smirked. "Some people are just made for menial work. Life's not fair, but it's efficient." Ivy paused briefly, her back to them, her hands tightening on the handle of her cart. Her calm exterior betrayed none of the fire she felt inside. Invisible, they thought. That's what they always think. She had heard these words before, in countless iterations, from people who underestimated her. And yet, she remained poised. This was the game she had chosen to play, and she intended to win. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Ivy leaned back against the wall and allowed herself a small, triumphant grin. The shadow beneath the tower would not stay in the dark for long. She had learned to thrive in the spaces where others overlooked her. Soon, the world of Meridian Towers would learn that the invisible were often the ones holding the most power. The faint hum of the service elevator accompanied Ivy Monroe as it ascended toward the upper floors. She stared at her reflection in the steel doors, her green uniform contrasting sharply against the polished metal. To most, she looked like just another cleaning lady, a fixture of the background, someone to be ignored. But Ivy wasn't one to dwell on appearances. Her true identity was hidden beneath the surface, carefully crafted over years of strategic planning and relentless determination. "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity," she whispered again, the words a mantra that carried her through each challenge. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Ivy grew up in Eastwood Heights, where crumbling buildings and broken promises defined the landscape. Her mother, Evelyn Monroe, worked 2 jobs cleaning houses and offices to make ends meet. While others saw Evelyn as invisible, Ivy saw strength and resilience in her mother's every move. Evelyn's tireless efforts to provide for her daughter instilled a lesson Ivy carried into adulthood. Never let anyone else define your worth. By the time Ivy was 16, she had already made up her mind to break free from the cycle of invisibility. She excelled in school, earning scholarships that led her to an Ivy League education. She navigated business school with the same grit she had inherited from her mother. But even with her credentials, breaking into the corporate world was no easy feat. At her first job as a junior analyst in a high-powered firm, Ivy experienced the subtle but pervasive discrimination that plagued the industry. Meetings where her ideas were dismissed, promotions that bypassed her for less qualified colleagues, and the constant reminder that her presence was tolerated, not welcomed. It was there she learned her most important lesson. The game wasn't fair, but the rules could be bent if you knew how to play them. And Ivy played them well. Over the years, she quietly built her wealth, saving and investing strategically. She used pseudonyms and shell companies to acquire shares in Meridian Towers, the very company where she now pushed a cleaning cart. While others climbed ladders, Ivy moved silently through the shadows, buying up stock in small increments to avoid detection. By the time she had reached her goal, majority shareholder, her name was buried so deeply in legal paperwork that no one had connected her to her growing empire. The irony of it all wasn't lost on Ivy. The same systems designed to keep people like her out had become the tools she wielded to rise to the top. Yet, her goal wasn't just personal success. Try not to become a person of success, but rather try to become a person of value, her mother had once told her. A quote Evelyn had scribbled in the margins of an old notebook she used for budgeting. Ivy had taken those words to heart. Success meant nothing if it didn't pave the way for others to follow. As the elevator dinged, signaling her arrival, Ivy stepped out onto the executive floor. She moved with deliberate purpose, her hands steady on the cart. Every step she took brought her closer to her ultimate goal, transforming the culture of Meridian Towers from within. It wasn't just about claiming power. It was about wielding it in a way that mattered. Today, she observed. Tomorrow, she would act. The wheels of change had already been set in motion, and Ivy Monroe was ready to drive them forward. The executive floor was a stark contrast to the rest of Meridian Towers. Here, the walls were lined with modern art, and the air was scented with subtle notes of cedarwood and ambition. Ivy Monroe moved quietly down the polished hallway, her cleaning cart rolling softly across the floor. She passed rows of glass-walled offices, catching glimpses of the company's top brass seated in their leather chairs, exuding an aura of untouchable authority. She paused briefly outside the boardroom, where laughter spilled into the corridor. Inside, Carter Hayes, the silver-haired CEO, leaned back in his chair with a self-satisfied grin. His tailored suit looked more like a proclamation of power than clothing. Beside him sat Evelyn Parker, the sharp-tongued COO, and Mark Ellison, the CFO, infamous for his brutal cost-cutting measures. The three of them were the architects of Meridian's success, or so they thought. Ivy busied herself wiping the large glass panels outside the boardroom, her ears attuned to the conversation within. "Another merger down, and another bonus coming our way," Carter announced, swirling his glass of sparkling water. "It's not just hard work," Evelyn quipped with a smirk. "It's knowing how to stay at the top of the food chain." Mark chuckled. "The ones at the bottom, they're there for a reason. Scrubbing floors and keeping the lights on is about all they're good for." Their laughter rang out, sharp and condescending. Ivy's grip on the rag tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. Invisible, she thought again. They believed she was just another cog in the machine, incapable of understanding their world. Little did they know, she had already mapped every crack in the system they were so proud of. Albert Einstein's words echoed in her mind. "The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking." These executives clung to outdated notions of power, blind to the revolution brewing just beneath their feet. As Ivy moved on, she passed a young intern in the hallway, a black woman with tight braids who looked nervous, clutching a stack of files. Their eyes met briefly and Ivy offered a small nod. The woman's expression softened as if reassured by the silent connection. In that moment, Ivy saw a reflection of her younger self, ambitious but overlooked, determined yet constrained by a system stacked against her. She knew she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the invisible faces that kept the tower standing. The giants in the boardroom had no idea their world was about to change, but Ivy did, and she was ready to show them. The next morning, the executive boardroom hummed with anticipation. The leadership team of Meridian Towers had gathered for their regular strategy meeting. Coffee cups clinked against the polished oak table as Carter Hayes, the CEO, leaned back in his chair, reviewing quarterly projections. Around him, Evelyn Parker and Mark Ellison exchanged smug remarks about the latest cost-cutting initiative that would secure their hefty bonuses. The double doors to the boardroom creaked open, and Ivy Monroe stepped inside, wearing the same green janitor's uniform she had donned every day for the past month. At first, no one looked up, too engrossed in their conversation to notice her. When she didn't move to clean the windows or sweep the floor, Carter finally glanced her way, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. "Excuse me," he said sharply, his tone dismissive. "This is a private meeting." Ivy met his gaze, her posture calm, yet commanding. "I'm aware," she replied, her voice steady. "That's why I'm here." The room fell silent, confusion rippling through the group. Evelyn furrowed her brow. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her irritation thinly veiled. Without a word, Ivy reached into her pocket and withdrew a neatly folded document. She placed it on the table in front of Carter. He picked it up reluctantly, his expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief as he scanned the contents. Evelyn and Mark leaned in, their faces mirroring his shock. "This is impossible," Carter stammered, his voice faltering. "How?" "It's not impossible," Ivy interrupted smoothly. "It's the result of years of planning and patience. As of this morning, I am the majority shareholder of Meridian Towers." Evelyn's jaw dropped, and Mark looked as though he might choke on his coffee. "This has to be a mistake," Mark muttered, his tone desperate. "It's no mistake," Ivy replied, crossing her arms. "While you were busy laughing at people like me, I was building a strategy. I've spent years understanding this company, not from the top, but from the ground up. And now, it belongs to me." Carter's hands trembled as he placed the document back on the table. You're just a janitor," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. Ivy leaned forward, her voice firm yet composed. "I'm not just anything, and that's the problem with how you run this company. You've built your empire on arrogance, disregarding the people who keep it running. That ends today." The room remained silent, the weight of her words pressing down on the executives. For the first time in their careers, they were powerless, their authority stripped away by someone they had deemed invisible. With a small, triumphant smile, Ivy stepped back. "Change is coming to Meridian Towers. You can either adapt, or you can step aside. The choice is yours." As Ivy left the boardroom, the executives sat in stunned silence, the foundation of their world irreversibly shaken. The revolution had begun, and Ivy Monroe was at its helm. Days after Ivy Monroe's stunning revelation, the atmosphere at Meridian Towers had shifted dramatically. Gone were the echoes of dismissive laughter and self-congratulatory boasts. In their place was a buzz of uncertainty and curiosity. The invisible janitor who had silently worked among them for weeks was now the woman leading the company, a leader who saw the cracks in the foundation and was determined to rebuild it. Ivy wasted no time. In her first week as the majority shareholder, she called for a company-wide meeting. The entire staff, from executives to interns to janitorial staff, gathered in the same marble-floored lobby where Ivy had once been overlooked. As she stepped onto the makeshift stage, the crowd fell silent. She wore no expensive suit, no flashy watch, just a simple blouse and slacks. But her presence commanded attention. "Good morning," Ivy began, her voice steady but powerful. "Many of you may still be processing the changes that have taken place. Let me assure you, I'm not here to destroy Meridian Towers. I'm here to transform it." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room. For too long, this company has been run by people who measure success by profits alone. But true success isn't just about numbers. It's about people. It's about recognizing that every single person in this building contributes to our achievements. From the executives in the boardroom to the janitorial staff who keep this place running, everyone matters. Ivy's words resonated deeply with the crowd, especially those who had long felt invisible. Among them was Renee, the young intern Ivy had encountered in the hallway, who now stood at the back of the room, her eyes shining with newfound hope. The changes Ivy implemented were swift and bold. She began by dismantling the toxic corporate culture that had festered under the previous leadership. Executives were required to attend empathy and leadership training sessions. and a new mentorship program was introduced to foster connections between employees at all levels. The goal was simple: bridge the divide between the top and bottom of the hierarchy. One of her most radical moves was the creation of the Equity Council, a diverse group of employees tasked with ensuring that every decision made by the company aligned with its new mission of inclusivity and fairness. Ivy also overhauled the company's compensation structure, ensuring fair wages and bonuses for all employees, not just the executives. Resistance from the old guard was inevitable. Carter Hayes and a few of his loyalists attempted to undermine Ivy's initiatives, claiming she was jeopardizing the company's profitability. But Ivy was prepared. She unveiled a comprehensive report detailing how the new policies would not only improve employee satisfaction, but also boost productivity and long-term growth. The data was irrefutable, and even the most skeptical critics were forced to concede. As weeks turned into months, the impact of Ivy's leadership became evident. The once stifling atmosphere of Meridian Towers transformed into one of collaboration and respect. Employees who had once felt undervalued now found their voices, contributing ideas and innovations that propelled the company forward. Profits began to rise, not at the expense of the workforce, but because of their empowerment. For Ivy, the most rewarding moment came when she crossed paths with Renee again, this time in a new role as a junior manager. "Thank you," Renee said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've shown me that it's possible to succeed without losing who you are." Ivy smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Remember this," she said, quoting the wisdom her mother had once shared with her. "Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile." Under Ivy's leadership, Meridian Towers became a symbol of what a company could achieve when its foundation was built on respect, fairness, and value for every individual. Her journey was a testament to the power of resilience, proving that the invisible could not only be seen, but could lead, inspire, and transform the world around them.